Hello. This is going to be a pretty informal video. A couple months ago, I mentioned I was going to do a series of Japanese themed reads. I read Shogun, Musashi, I read some selections from Rashomon, and I read Lafcadio Hearn's Ghost Stories, which is Japanese Ghost Stories, which is a collection of Lafcadio Hearn's writings. I haven't talked about Lafcadio Hearn's or Rashomon now yet. I will probably talk about. I think I might talk about Rashomon in a sort of a very short video collected with some other stuff. And Lafcadio Hearn will get his own video, probably tacked on with another book that I've ordered and I want to read. I think it might be interesting. So, although I would like to put it out right away, it's whatever. It's going to take a minute. So that video will be delayed. But essentially, I'm sort of finishing this up, at least this bout of it. So, in my research, in that sort of looking and reading these things, I kind of got this idea when I was like reading about Shogun, about how it was this book with this English-speaking writer who wrote about Japanese history, not very accurately, but affectionately, and how that book became popular enough to be translated back into Japanese. And so it's an unusual scenario. And Lafcadio Hearn, who read these ancient or older Japanese ghost stories and wrote them for an English-speaking audience, and sort of ended up being sort of like a cataloger of Japanese ghost stories that got translated back into Japanese and is an affectionately loved work, from what I understand. And that really interested me. That whole thing I just thought was really fascinating. And I just kind of was thinking to myself, like, wouldn't it be interesting? And the idea that I had was, wouldn't it be interesting if maybe a Japanese writer had written an American Western for a Japanese audience that became popular enough to be translated back into English? I don't know of any such book. I really wish that there was one. Hopefully it would be good. But I'm really interested in that idea, that concept, just that sort of like, it's a dated reference, but that game of telephone. But I didn't really find it. But I did find something else. James Tiptree Jr.'s The Starry Rift. And specifically not this book, but a story, The Only Neat Thing to Do. It's a science fiction sort of space exploration story about a young girl who comes from a wealthier family, who outfits her ship for distant space travel and travels to the frontier of space, and sort of the things that happen. I'm not going to spoil the story right here. I probably will spoil it later on, but I'll talk about it when I'm ready to do that. The reason I landed on this was a blog post on Tanoshimi XYZ. I'll have a link to the post from Castle. I think that's how you would say it. I hope. This post talks about how this story, because of its somewhat emotional ending, ended up sort of working its way into Japanese vernacular. And that the title of the story, The Only Neat Thing to Do, becoming a phrase that people would use in Japanese. There's multiple examples of how it is used, sometimes ironically and things, but also seriously. I believe there was an episode of Evangelion that even used that as one of its titles or referenced it. In part, it's interesting because Japanese culture got attached to this story because of that ending. The book, I think in Japanese, actually gets retitled with that story. It isn't called Starry Rift. It's called The Only Neat Thing to Do, or something like that. But that might be slightly changed in translation. This book was sort of seen as like a gateway book to someone interested in Western science fiction. And there's also this sense of like might seem sort of like reductive to a Japanese audience, and it's not intended to be, but there was a sense of like people who maybe wouldn't normally read science fiction, like science fiction, even though they didn't understand the science, that the science wasn't really what interested them. It was the sort of strangeness, like it was almost made up. There's a quote, and I love this quote, like, the writing is so cute, but the story is actually large scale tragedy, or I don't understand science fiction. Now I want to read more of the genre. And I really love that idea of like, I don't really care about the science, or the science is just kind of bizarre and weird, but the story is really good. The desire to read the science fiction wasn't from desire to read science fiction. That was just sort of this window dressing on a story that was tragic. And I just thought that was such an interesting perspective to have. That it was engaging with a different part of science fiction than what we normally like. It's not, you don't normally recommend a science fiction story to somebody because of the characters per se or something else. It's usually like that's a feature, like, oh, it's science fiction and it has good character development. Not like, oh, there's this great character development story and it's science fiction. I mean, it's just not something that we I mean, I don't normally think about it like that. And that's sort of the perception I have. There is some sentiment like, if you read this story and you don't cry, then you aren't human. There was some quote about that too in this post, which I thought was just so crazy. It's like you must have this must you must react to it intensely. It's a test of humanity or something. It's like some sort of like something like a Philip K. Dick book or something, right? You know, we're gonna have you read the story to see if you're human or something. This is not exactly what they were going for, but that's what's going on in my head at least, and I love that idea. Of a book that you read. That's a really good idea for a story, isn't it? A book that you read to see if you're human or not. It's this novel to have an emotional. This novel, it's a novella to have an emotional reaction to. Kind of got me down this thinking about, a different approach to science fiction, another culture, another language's approach to science fiction that doesn't have the same responses to it that we might. The story itself, I guess we're going to spoil it a little bit, is about this, like I said, a young girl who has this spaceship that her family can afford, and she outfits it for deep space travel. She goes to the frontier of space and decides to go out and sort of like, she hears a story about these two men who are out there who like sort of are mapping different planets and areas of space, and they're lost, and she thinks, well, maybe I'll go out there and try to find them. That's the neat thing to do. It's like she thinks to herself, she's young, she's like kind of like late teens or mid-teens in the story, and she thinks, well, if I do this now, I can do it. If I wait, then I'll probably never get this chance again. My parents won't let this happen. They'll stop me. Somebody will try to stop me. This is my one chance. I'll have one chance in my life to do this crazy, great adventure. So I'm just going to, if you're going to do it, go all the way. If you're going to be a bear, be a grizzly, basically. So she goes into cryo sleep and wakes up and discovers a message pod from this ship of these two lost men, and she intercepts it. She captures it and looks at it and notices something pricks her finger. And as soon as that happened, I knew something was up. She's reading it, and then she starts feeling strange, but she goes to sleep. And when she wakes up, she notices she has a voice in her own head, and that she has been sort of infected with this alien parasite. The alien parasite is not mean-spirited or evil. It's actually a very shy and a very feminine-esque sort of personality, and also it's also very young. And so it's like these two teenage girls, one living in the other one's head, sort of interacting. And here's where the heavy spoilers go. So if you don't want to be spoiled at all, you definitely need to stop at this point and skip ahead. I'll have a timestamp or something. This alien parasite is young, isn't causing any damage to the main character, but she also is feeling these bodily urges to release spores, right, to reproduce asexually. And she's not been trained enough, she doesn't have enough experience to stop her body from doing it. She can feel it coming on. The main character and this parasite have already gone and found the two men who were missing, and found where they crash landed, and their interactions with these aliens earlier were beneficial and good, except that the adult parasites in their bodies died and released spores of children, and the children, having no adult to instruct them, basically devoured them from the inside. And so the young girl realizes that the brain parasite tells her that I'm going to release these spores. I will be unable. It'll be like almost an animalistic urge. I won't be able to stop, and it's going to eat you alive from the inside, eat your brain out, essentially. And so the main character decides to painfully, because there's sort of this auto response from the parasite that she can't prevent, trying to stop her. She sets the course of her ship to the heart of the sun, before going into cryosleep to essentially kill herself and the parasite, who's extremely sad and sorry about the entire event. Actually, a very interesting story. A story I've sort of seen something like before, and I like how the parasite is never an ugly, nasty, like, I got you sort of trick. It's always a very sympathetic and sort of submissive personality to the main character's personality. And they end up in this unescapable conundrum. And there's a little bit more to the story, but I don't exactly want to spell out every single detail. So even if you listen the whole way, I still think that there's some things to discover in that story. It's pretty good. Actually, I really liked it. I like the unique approach. And I've kind of been withholding a little bit of information. Maybe if you don't know, James Tiptree Jr. is a pseudonym. The author's actual name is Alice Sheldon, and this is a picture of her. And I believe that this story, from what I remember, was written when she was in her 70s. She was a very reserved person and didn't really want her personality, her true gender, to be discovered. She presented herself as a man. And at this time, it was all interactions through letters and submissions and things like that, right? There probably wasn't even a phone conversation that ever happened. So even her, I don't think really anybody really knew, or very few people knew. She was a ex-CIA agent. And I thought also, although not here, but in the ebook that I'll try and get the title of the ebook. I cannot remember what the title of the ebook that you can get for this. That includes that story. It is not the Starry Rift itself. That does not have an ebook. You'd have to buy the actual book. But I think at least the story, the neat thing to do is included in an ebook. She Murmurs in Darkness. And in the introduction to that, it talks about how there was a certain personality that Tiptree Jr. had when she wrote presenting herself as a man that was different than the way that she wrote when she sort of came out and presented herself as a woman, or she was discovered. I don't exactly, we've even seen some of this before, right? I mean, didn't, to some extent, Robert E. Howard talk about when he wrote Conan stories, he imagined Conan behind him, demanding that he write a certain way. There's a sort of like, a writer, sometimes when they get into writing something, they get into a certain personality. They sort of change personalities. Or the writer, the person who sits down to write, is not the same person that you talk to, or who does interviews. It's not quite the same person. There is a biography that I'm kind of interested in reading. I just don't know that it's going to be super soon that I'm going to read it. I do plan to read Tiptree Jr.'s Up the Walls of the World, which is a Barlow's Guide read for me. Definitely that book is something that you've probably heard of and is a little more accessible. This book wasn't exactly hard to find. In fact, it was pretty cheap. You could probably find it pretty easy. I think this is like a Sci-Fi book club printing. I'm like 99% positive because of everything else. It just feels like and looks like it. Yes, it even says book club edition. It's a Sci-Fi book club edition. It was not expensive, and it shouldn't be expensive to get it. The ebook is available. The story is, I don't know, in the book it's about like 40 or 50 pages, something like that. The ebook format is not very long. It wouldn't take long to read, and I think that ebook of Tiptree Jr.'s short fiction is reasonably priced for the amount of fiction you get, and that's certainly not the only thing of Tiptree's to read. It's just the one that I'm talking about right now. So. Really great thing, something worth exploring. I love the idea. I don't know. I would love to see other stuff. I love the idea of something, not really having the impact in its own culture that it was written for, but having a significant impact in a culture or in a language even that it wasn't written for. I think that's so fascinating to me. And so it was a really fun and interesting journey. Definitely going to link that blog post because I think it's really worth your time to read if you want to read it. It definitely goes a little off the wall. There's not exactly anything not safe for work in there, but it does link not safe for work stuff sort of somewhat jokingly. So anyways, just know that, I guess, depending on where you're going. Anyhow, a really great post by Castle. I absolutely recommend checking it out, reading it. I thought it was really interesting if you want to go down that rabbit hole and see what you think. So anyhow, that's it. I don't know. I just did this thing and I thought I really kind of want to talk about this at some point, and I don't know how disjointed or off the wall or even like random it might feel and seem, but it's just something I wanted to talk about. So there you are. That's it. That's the thing I did. I'm done. Thanks for watching. Appreciate your time. Consider liking and subscribing if you like to see me stumble through fiction. That's all for now. Bye.